Stacy Rasgon of Bernstein Research. First person I needed to hear from. How significant is this news?
For who?
For all these players. I mean, it's stark, right? Nvidia surging, Intel sinking, the market's voting. Are we getting it right?
Look, so there have already been other players that were going to be doing ARM-based PCs. Qualcomm is the one. They've actually been talking about it for quite a while. They're actually going to be introducing ARM-based PC chips into next year. And then, of course, you have Apple. I think that's actually the impetus for all of this. Apple's moved over to their own ARM-based architecture over the last several years, and their market share has actually gone up quite a bit. It's increased since they've delivered these own like self-designed chips. And so I think there's a desire to see if this architecture can roll out more broadly. This is not new, by the way. Like, Microsoft has had Windows running on ARM for a decade, probably, since 2012, I think. They used to call it Windows RT. We used to call it WART. And in fact, the very first Microsoft Surface tablet, which is kind of a PC, actually did have an ARM-based processor. It actually had an Nvidia Tegra processor back in, in the early 2010s. So this has been tried for a while. It's never really caught up until this point. But I'd say Apple is an existence proof, at least, that you can actually develop now today compelling platforms on ARM. And I think there is a desire on Microsoft's part to see if they can stretch that farther. I'm not necessarily surprised to see other vendors besides Qualcomm into this mix. Again, I don't know that Microsoft was going to give Qualcomm exclusivity forever. If they can actually grow, and I think it's an if, but if they could actually grow an ARM-based ecosystem, clearly it's bad for Intel. But there's no way that this is positive for Intel. Like, best case, it doesn't take off and it's neutral. Worst case, it starts to take share and it's bad. And for any of these other guys, whether it's Qualcomm or Nvidia, it'll be incremental to anything they're doing right now because they don't do any of that. And so, yeah, it's positive for them, sure.
What about AMD? Why is AMD down on this announcement if they're going to make chips with ARM's technology as well?
Yeah, well, they also make chips with x86. I mean, you could probably argue either way. It's not as good, right? I guess if there's a shift in architectures and they're making ARM-based chips, they can benefit from that. But clearly, if it starts to take share from x86, they make that stuff too, so it's not as incremental. I guess Intel as well. I mean, there's nothing necessarily stopping Intel from making an ARM chip if they decided, except themselves, right? If they decided that was the right thing to do. Intel's also trying to build a foundry business, so, in theory, once they could get that off the ground, there would be nothing stopping them from fabbing or manufacturing those chips, whether for themselves or potentially for other folks. So maybe there's other opportunities across the chain to monetize this. But I mean, clearly it's a better option for you if you're not cannibalizing anything that you're already doing, right? If it's something that's wholly new, I mean, that's going to be better.
Well, we're also not talking about, years and years and years off, like we have been for the most part talking about Nvidia in some respects for AI. Here, what I read is that they could actually start, Nvidia and AMD could start selling PC chips as soon as 2025.
Well,
should that surprise us?
No, I don't think so. I mean, Qualcomm was absolutely going to start selling chips in 2024, next year. That's known. Right, for Qualcomm, at least, we've been looking at more as an option value. And again, I've sort of thought, like, when Qualcomm had an analyst day a couple of years ago and they gave some targets for these things, they actually didn't put any of this in those targets. They talked about it as an option. And so my view for Qualcomm, at least, has always been, look, if ARM-based Windows PC become a thing, they're in a good spot to benefit from that. Clearly, there are others that could benefit from that as well if ARM-based Windows PCs do become a thing. Qualcomm will be here next year, and yeah, 2025, that seems like a reasonable time frame for others to deliver. Sure.
All right, we'll leave it there. I appreciate you coming on with us as quickly as you possibly could, Stace. I really wanted to hear from you on this. I know our viewers did too. Stacy Rasgon joining us here on Closing Bell.